Right, guys. Welcome to week 4 of the Glittery Musings podcast. This week, we are reading Twilight chapters 10 through 12 and Midnight Sun chapters 11 through 14. If you are not already aware, you can always check the reading schedule on Instagram. It is our pinned post, the first post you'll see on our page, which is Glittery Musings is our handle. Without further ado, I think we should just jump in. Now, me and Amy were talking before we started recording, and for both of us, we've less notes this week. And a lot of that kind of twofold. One being, it's just a lot of them like getting to know each other. It's less like for us to discuss, we felt like, and more just like kind of the start of their relationship in some ways. And then also, again, lots of dialogue. So we're seeing similar things in Twilight and Midnight Sun. But yeah, without further ado, Amy, do you want to jump into chapter 10?
Sure. So just a little summary of the chapter. We see Edward drives Bella to school, and Bella talks to Jessica, who has to know what happened with Edward the night before. And we know that, well, Bella knows that Edward is listening into the conversation. And then Bella and Edward have lunch together. And that is all that happens in the chapter. A couple hours, but...
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it's basically beginning of school day through lunch.
Yeah.
Half a day. Yeah, I do like, yeah, obviously Jessica wanting all the tea, I think is very relatable. I would too.
I had a note. I have to find my note. I had a note that was like, this sounds like something Callie would say, with something about Jessica wanting to know all the details. Oh, I won't find the exact note, but there was just like one specific excerpt that she had that I'm like, I could see Callie saying this, but Callie would have genuine interest rather than just wanting gossip.
Yeah, it's true. I would not want the gossip because I am interested in the other person. I just want the gossip, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. To me, besides Jessica wanting the tea, kind of the bigger point is the start of Edward driving her to school, which we see throughout the rest of the chapters here, that he's picking her up for school now. And, okay, I'm curious your thoughts, Amy. Do you think this is like cute, sweet thing, or are you more like, that's kind of intense, you've gone on low-key one date?
No, I think it's cute. I wasn't creeped out at all by it.
Okay.
I also like that can just be a thing that like friends do or whatever. I don't know. Yeah. I wasn't.
It's
cute.
It's cute. Environmentally conscious.
Yeah. I also have to say, as someone in high school who was drove by their friends to high school, I did have a couple times where the boy that I liked picked me up, and I loved that as a teenager. So, you know,
the best.
Yeah.
The boy I like didn't go to my school, so
makes it
was not an option.
But, you married him, right? So.
True, I did. So I guess I won in the end.
Oh, yeah, man. No. Creeped out by many things by Edward. Him driving her to school, not one of them.
Okay, great.
Speaking of being creeped out by Edward, our poll last week on Instagram, I think won. It was 25% responded saying that they thought it was just passion that Edward was stalking. 75% creeped out by it.
Well, the 75, you're wrong. And clearly you haven't reread Twilight recently, except for Amy, who literally is, but you're still wrong. Yeah, that's, again, I feel passionately about it. So,
yeah.
Surprise, surprise. Oh, man. Yeah. All right. Well, great.
But I'm curious,
Thanks.
since you
Thanks,
asked that
Cole.
question, do you think it's
No, I'm
you don't
into
think it's
it.
creepy? Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
into it. No, for sure. I've thought basically very little was no. Okay, that's not even true because plenty is creepy, right? Like we talked about last week, the creepy or cute thing. But I just realized, like, you've got this person so intensely focused on understanding Bella and her whole world, and I just am willing to put aside all the red flags for that massive green flag in my book. So,
Yeah, I do feel like these chapters it's less creepy. There's still a couple of creepy moments in my opinion, but a lot of it is like more sweet. And I think it's because it's more normal getting to know someone else kind of thing rather. Well, I mean, he's still creeping on her in the middle of the night kind of thing. But that's one of the creepy moments. And most of the other stuff is like sweet getting to know her and actually having genuine interest in things. And
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think these chapters, if you're still a skeptic on Team Edward, I feel like they're good. They're good chapters to be like, no, you can get it. Like, you get why Bella's into him, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, obviously I've gotten it the whole time, but
Yeah.
Team Edward from the start. Yeah, okay, well, let's jump into the Midnight Sun chapter because, again, super similar. It also takes place, not a long time. Like, is it the same? It also cuts off right before biology? I believe so, right?
Yep, it cuts off at the same point. The only thing that's different is the beginning of the chapter, where the first line is CNN broke the story first, and this is leaving off from
Yes.
last week's reading about the guy in Port Angeles, about how
Yes.
Edward wanted to murder him and all of that. And I was a
Mm-hmm.
little worried at first. I was like, oh God, did they kill him? Like, and I mean, obviously, this man is a horrible person, and him dying would not be the worst thing in the world.
Totally.
They have like the code and ethics that they do. I feel like killing him would make me like the Cullens less. So I'm glad they didn't kill him.
Yeah. And it's your boy. It's Carlisle.
Yeah,
You know?
I know I
Yeah.
would have been very worried if he had.
Yeah, that's my first note in this chapter is yay, they didn't kill him.
Honestly, same.
I mean, I thought it was smart to be like they just moved him to a different state and he got arrested over state lines. Like,
yeah, actually,
Carlisle's a thinker.
Yeah, it's true. One of my first notes in this chapter was before it got to the clear point where he wasn't murdered, and it was like I highlighted a section saying that where Edward's saying, luckily it was a heavy news day. There was an earthquake in South America, political kidnapping in the Middle East, so it only ended up earning a few seconds on the news and a grainy picture. And I commented on it, was just like, luckily there were these other tragedies to cover up this murder my father committed, because this is what I thought. And then I said, I really hope I'm wrong about this and something else happened. Luckily did. So.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I thought it was interesting. Now, tell me if this was your take also. It seems like they intentionally moved him so that the news coverage would not be in Forks and it wouldn't freak Bella out.
Yeah.
Was part of the rationale
about this. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was very, very good move. So, because if it was more local news, obviously, like Bella definitely would have heard about that. Her father being the chief of police for sure, even if it was town over, like
totally.
So yeah, I think that was a good move. One thing that I did make a note of though was Edward talking about how he had been right to trust Carlisle in the situation, but he had wished that he hadn't gotten off quite so easily. I'm like, I think going to prison for life might be a little more difficult than just dying. So,
Yeah. No, agree. Maybe it says more about my stance on the death penalty, but getting political this episode, guys. I don't know. But I'm with you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. yeah, so that's opening of the chapter. Then we get Edward being very distracted in his class as he is listening in to Jessica's thoughts. And you get him, picking her up from school also, under the pretense of she doesn't have a coat.
Mm-hmm.
Which a theme we see throughout this section of both books, and specifically in Midnight Sun, is Edward slowly crossing some of these boundaries that he has and finding ways. This one he really justifies, but then it kind of becomes this theme of like he crosses this boundary he is self-imposed, and then all of a sudden he's like, I crossed it once. I guess this is what we do now, like, and you see it with him picking her up. And then also with, him touching her. So, which also interesting. Not for me, I'm like, don't love that ideology. But, yeah, it is what it is. Edward.
Yeah. There's a lot of tension in these chapters around the whole touching thing, especially from both sides. And it seems like they're both afraid to touch one another and that the other one will freak out.
Yeah. It is so true. So much of the tension is they are both, neither of them is concerned with themselves. One of them, that's more justified. Although, to be fair, Edward is he's concerned for his family, I guess, also, that it's going to, like, blow up and be bad. But, yeah, otherwise not really. And they're both so concerned they're going to do something to freak out the other person, which is, that's
I do
funny.
find that pretty funny. I like having the both perspectives on that, just because you're like, you're both being silly. Like, I mean, not.
Yeah. No, okay. Well, this is for next chapter. All right, pause. Remind me to come back to my thought around this. Okay, so then we get where he's listening into Jessica's mind. We obviously get a lot more selfishness from Jessica. Surprise, surprise, said no one. And yeah, I also think it's interesting that Jessica is like still kind of hung up on him, obviously just in her head, but still she's like into him. And then we see her being like, no, like just think about Mike, stick with what's realistic, Anyways, basically I'm just like, Jessica, you suck as a friend. You're the worst.
Yeah.
I
did have some notes before we got to Jessica.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Point of view that I just wanted to make sure that I talked about if I can get to them. Oh, my notes are so disorganized. When Bella gets into his car and he talks about the happiness that he felt and all that sort of thing. And it's sweet. And I'm like, this definitely makes me like Edward better and the relationship better. And then it also made me think if we had a book from Jacob's point of view, if I would still be Team Jacob or not. I feel like I would be, but I also don't know because I don't know what Jacob's thinking. So who knows? But we do get a little bit of insight into what Jacob's thinking in these, which I do like, but we'll get to that later. I also had another note that had to do with when they were driving to school. And it was an excerpt saying, it was no accident that we were most often seen in the Volvo, a car celebrated above all for its safety. And I'm like, did Stephanie Meyer get like paid by Volvo for this or something? It's so often mentioned about it specifically being a Volvo. In that line particularly, I'm like, it just
Yeah, the car details, again, I'm not a car person, but like they're
There's
like in that she's talking about real cars, specific things. I'm like, Stephanie Meyer's either is a car person or like is close friends or in some kind of relationship with someone who is a car person, because like the details
those are the first thoughts we hear of Jacob's are about cars.
Yeah. And like all these guys. Yeah, right. He's into the Volvo.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah,
That was just
so funny.
But
I just pulled up my notes and realized I also have some notes about Rosalie, which is again before Jessica. So I skipped ahead myself. But yeah, just being interested. Rosalie's obviously like so pissed at him, so pissed. And I have a note that doesn't make sense to me, which maybe it will make sense to you, Amy. It says, are we assuming Rosalie can get them talking or that she's just generally pissed? Which again, what am I referring to? I'd have to actually go back into my book to see. Well,
get them talking to is referring to. Obviously, she is pissed off throughout these chapters.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to skip through on my Kindle here to see if I can.
Yeah, I just have a note. The only thing that I have on Rosalie was about Edward says that Rosalie would have enjoyed Bella's reaction to something. I don't remember specific. Oh, it was about her car. But she said that was if she was being objective about Bella, which wouldn't happen. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I don't like Rosalie. She's just very close-minded, but also like, I get it. You don't want to be exposed as a vampire, so I guess that makes sense. But
yeah,
everyone else is slightly more open-minded than her.
Yeah, I also am curious. It's one of my notes later on with Rosalie, which is that Edward says that Emmett always gives Rosalie the benefit of the doubt, and Edward never gives her the benefit of the doubt. And so I just think that's interesting. Like, I wonder if we would like her more if we just did a different POV. But most of our interaction is, I mean, I still think she's kind of annoying. Like, when we get to know her more later in the series, I still am like not that into her. But specifically to be like, we are getting like the worst version of her now.
Yeah, I think I definitely could potentially feel different with a different point of view. And I even think that there's some stuff later on in the series from like, obviously from Bella's perspective, that does make me understand her a bit more. I don't remember specifically what details there are, but I feel like I remember that happening. But that being said, I think it's still my least favorite. But
right. Yeah.
But I like it so much. I also, in these chapters, it's a little later on in the chapters, was bummed about Jasper's perspective, because Jasper has also always been one of my favorites. And I'm like, later on, I'm like, I don't like that. So we'll get to that. But
yeah. Okay. Anything else? Again, my notes are very, very short for a lot of the chapters this week. Anything else you wanted to add?
Are you talking about before we get to Jessica or for the whole chapter?
I guess either. Both are relevant.
Anything before Jessica? With Jessica, I was just a little annoyed that she was jealous. And I'm like, you're dating Mike. You literally went on a date with him a couple of days ago. Like, calm down. Like,
literally. That Bella set up. Not that she knows that, but still.
Yeah.
Do
you have any other specific notes on the chapter or not so much?
No, basically all of it's just like reacting to like little like being like, ugh, annoying or whatever, you know.
Yeah. One thing that I did have of note was Edward talking about how they all hated Jim because they had to throw games, which I thought was pretty funny and something I never thought about. Because, they all could easily beat everybody in every sport that they play ever. So.
Yeah. I know. I did like Emmett specifically, like being so annoyed about that. Like Edward saying how hard that was for him to like purposely throw games. So funny.
Yeah. I also had a note about when they're at lunch and we hear some of the other Cullens' thoughts happening about where Rosalie is freaking out because she learns that Bella knows that they're vampires. And I'm like, that's a little crazy to tell someone in a cafeteria. But also Alice had some vision that if it was done a different way, it would have been much, much worse. So,
yeah.
But I was just like, Man, that's a lot happening right there. So
Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's what my note is referring to. Who knows? Who
yeah,
knows?
very much.
Anyways, yeah, her freaking out. That is the another big plot point we did not talk about is Rosalie and the whole Cullen family finds out that Bella knows that he's a vampire and that
Yeah,
they're all vampires.
yeah.
They do
Uh,
not react well.
no, no, not so much. I also had a note in regards to their conversation in the cafeteria, talking about it's kind of a constant thing throughout these chapters about how Edward is shocked that Bella thinks that she could possibly like him more than he likes her, and kind of
Mm.
vice versa. And he says something about she couldn't honestly believe that her human feelings, the fruition of 17 short mortal years, could be stronger than this demolition ball of emotion that had wrecked me after a century of emptiness. And I said, he underestimates the feelings of a 17-year-old girl.
So true. So true. Oh,
Which I
yeah.
just thought was pretty funny. But
Yeah, I think I have more notes on it in this next chapter, but we can start talking about it. But I do think it's really, um, yeah, again, it is a classic like miscommunication trope kind of thing, where neither of them, like they both think that the other one is more casual and that they're the one who's obsessing like in unhealthy amount, which is really interesting. And we get that perspective when Bella is talking to Jessica in this chapter, and that it's like so genuine that she feels that way, um, which is, I think that's part of what's fun about reading Midnight Sun, is to realize like, no, Edward felt this way about her the whole time, and is like more obsessed, I would say, and more intense about it for sure.
yeah,
So
I do like having that perspective because, like, I remember when I first read Twilight, I was like, what the heck is this man thinking? Like, I just had no idea. And, like, because he's kind of like hot and cold, and no
yeah,
pun intended with the cold thing, but he like, yeah, he just is kind of all over the place, and it's kind of hard to like read what's going on in his mind. Speaking of which,
totally.
at the end of this chapter, I was surprised to learn that when Bella asks if she could ever see him hunting, and he like freaks out and says absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
I did not expect the reason that he was freaking out because he saw a vision of Alice's, where
Mm.
presumably, I don't think they straight up say it. No, they do. She's dead. So they see a vision of Bella like dying if that were to happen. And when I like read it from the Twilight perspective, I just assumed that he like was aware of that being a risk, and it wasn't that he had seen this like graphic vision. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I felt similarly. And yeah, also thought it was like, oh, he just doesn't want her to like it'll be more tempting. But yeah, the vision is it's
yeah,
intense.
I was pretty sure that he was worried about the possibility of her dying, but I didn't think
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It was like so direct.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So those
Yeah.
are all the notes that I have for
Yeah.
that chapter.
Yeah. Okay. Do we want to talk chapter 11? I don't know. Is it more helpful for us to go chapter by chapter, or almost I feel like we end up talking about them both simultaneously, like the corresponding chunks.
We
But
could
if,
potentially, the way that my notes are, that would be
okay,
very
that's
difficult
great.
for me to do.
Yeah,
But
no worries.
yeah,
Phenomenal.
I
Okay,
think it's fine if
so
we talk about like things that
yeah,
happen
yeah,
in
yeah.
Midnight Sun while we're talking about it. And if we
Right.
talk about it, all of our notes about Midnight Sun, then we'll just go on to the next chapter of Twilight. I'm fine with that.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, so in this chapter, there is hella tension. And they're in biology class together, and the lights go out. They're watching a movie in class, and there's like this intense electric chemistry between them. Both of them feel it, and we are led to believe it's like purely like this emotional, intense connection. Yeah, going on. And to the point, both of them are like restraining themselves in biology class, like clutching their like fists or like sitting on their hands or whatever, different things to like avoid, because the compulsion is so strong to reach out and touch the other person. And they both feel this way, which I really liked in Midnight Sun, specifically that Edward looks over and can tell, like, and you get it a little bit in Twilight where Bella looks over and sees Edward is doing the same thing and kind of thinks like, oh, could he like have that reaction to me? Like, is he feeling this way? But then is more dismissive of it, where Edward overtly then is like smirking and like knows like, oh, we both are feeling this like intensely. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I actually have a note from the Twilight chapters because I was wondering whether or not, like, Edward was thinking the same thing as her or not, because he was clearly thinking something, but we didn't know what. And then there's after they walk out of biology class, it says that he walked me to my next class in silence. It paused at the door. I turned to say goodbye. His face had startled me. His expression was torn, almost pained, and so fiercely beautiful that the ache to touch him flared as strong as before. My goodbye stuck in my throat. And my note on it was saying, this has me convinced he was thinking the same thing as her in biology and is thinking the same thing now. And I thought that was just funny that you mentioned that. And I was literally thinking about the exact same things. And yeah,
it's and that's like, this whole chapter is just like all of the tension. I do think it's interesting, like in Twilight, I often wonder if there's something else happening. Like, I'm often curious, like, is this like a mystical, like magical thing happening between them? Is it like an influence? Specifically with Rosalie later on, and like her staring at Bella. But like, I wonder sometimes like how much is like magical and how much is like just the intensity of emotion that Bella is experiencing, right? Because like, again, I think if we're reading a different genre, right, this would just be like very good descriptive writing with an intense character or like a highly emotional character. And then we have like, because it's like a fantasy, then it always makes me wonder, like, is something else happening? Is this like a magical thing? Anyways, so yeah.
I know. I feel like I think about that like a little less with these books because like we talked about last week about how Twilight is like barely even a soft fantasy. Like I just don't think about that as much as I do with other fantasy books, but definitely still think about it somewhat. But most of it, I'm like, I think it's just intense feelings. And
yeah, no, it for sure is. And I think part of it is because I haven't read them in so long and clearly like only even remembered Alice had powers and things like that. So I think then it is more like the first time I'm reading it because I am like, wait, is this a reveal? Do we find out this is a thing and I forgot? Or like, yeah. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't have any more specific notes about this chapter, but I did have about the corresponding Midnight Sun chapter about we get a little more of a different plot line about how Edward is trying to find something nice to do for Angela.
Yeah. Let's talk about it because it's so sweet. It's so sweet.
Yeah, I really liked this, especially because I like that it wasn't directly related to Bella either, and it's just like shows like that he's just trying to like do a nice thing for someone, which I like.
Yeah. I also I was thinking when I was reading this section about how we talked about that Stephanie Myers really didn't enjoy writing Midnight Sun because there was so much like direct like obviously she's copying the same dialogue and things, so it just felt like much harder for her to write, which we had talked about in a previous episode. And I thought about, like, I bet this was fun to be able to, like, interject this whole scene and interaction with Edward and Emmett and all these things. Yeah. And I just loved, like, they're such, like, brother best friends also, Edward and Emmett in this. Like, I just, like, seeing them play off each other, like, was fun. And that Emmett thought
I feel
it was
like we're
fun.
going to see a lot more of Emmett when we look from Edward's perspective, which is fun because, I mean, I don't remember the books that well, but the movies I feel like don't show him much. And from what I remember of the books, I don't remember much. So it's fun to see that.
Yeah. Yeah. I just feel like we have so much less, like, he's just a character that's not as invested in Bella, both him and Rosalie. So I think it's fun, yeah, that we get so much more, because it's pretty clear of the siblings that Edward is closest with, Alice and Emmett are like his closest siblings. And he talks about, like, the one good thing Rosalie, like, has done for him is, like, pick Emmett because he's, like, such a good brother. Yeah, which is so funny. Like, he clearly just, Edward also is not into Rosalie.
Yeah.
So,
I also think it's funny with the Angela thing, how he's talking about how he doesn't understand, like, humans, how they can get upset about, like, compatibility issues when Angela's worried because she's 6 inches taller than Ben, the guy that she likes, and Edward is meanwhile worried because he is a vampire. Pretty funny.
Yeah, the, like, switch in his brain when all of a sudden he's like, wait, but they're both humans, what's the issue?
And it turns out it's just because Angela is 6 inches taller.
Yeah. So funny. So funny. It is, like,
I mean, when I read it, it just says to let a 6-inch height difference confound their happiness. So I assumed that Angela was the taller one. Or is it?
Yeah. And Ben mentions in his thoughts, we hear that, that she's taller than him. And, like,
oh yeah, that's right.
I guess that's going to be fine. Yeah.
So funny.
And he purposely, the person that he, like, pretends that Angela is, like, had said yes to going on a date to give Ben some confidence, is another, like, more socially awkward short person to, like, try to convince Ben that, you know, it's all good. So I do was just sweet. Like, Ben also, like, really likes her and thinks she's, like, the best, like, girl in the school. Like, it was just such a sweet section. Like,
yeah. And I like that, like, at the end, Edward, like, thinks more highly of Ben, because I feel like a lot of the time when we see Edward's thoughts of people, he, like, is very cynical, which is understandable if you can read everybody's thoughts. But, like, it was nice to see him, like, have a better impression of someone after reading their thoughts, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah. And just so funny. Like, Emmett and Edward, like, trying to, like, the playoff where he's like, no, apparently she's into this guy Ben, and Emmett's like, he's sitting behind you. Like, was, like, so cheesy, but, like, so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I mean, we're cruising through, but again, like we said, I feel like it's so much, like, they're just building their relationship, and I just don't have a lot of comments beyond being like, I'm into it. Like, I like them. It's cute.
There's a little bit of plot that we didn't talk about yet, is when Bella goes to gym class and has, like, Mike. A conversation with Mike, and also, like, accidentally hits herself with the racket. And Edward is listening to Mike's thoughts in this instance, which in this instance, Bella does not know that is happening, which just had me in a whole thing. I'm like, I could not date someone who had that. Obviously, hypothetical situation, but I'm like, I cannot imagine not having, like, 1 second of privacy, you know, like, just constant. But then Mike kind of, like, says something about how he doesn't like that she's with Edward, and I'm like, Mike, you have no right to say that. Come on.
No, Mike's being so shady. Like, and I'm glad that Bella just like shuts it down. And she's like, no, it's none of your business. I don't care if you don't like it. Move on, Mike. Move on.
Yeah. I did have an instance where Mike talks about how he wishes that Edward could die, which I'm like, that was a little intense. But then I thought back to when Edward thought about throwing Mike across the biology room multiple times. And I'm like, they're kind of on the same page here. But
yeah, it's mutual. It's mutual. But... yeah. Uh-huh. Oh, man. Yeah, the rage jealousy thing. Don't get. I also thought it was interesting before Edward, we're jumping around here, but before Edward drops Bella off for Jim, when he does touch her, Bella talks about it being like hot, like not like him being freezing cold, which is the first time anytime he has like touched her at all in the book so far, there has been comments about how like cold and freezing he is, and this is the first time we don't get that, which just again another note, building the story, building the arc.
Well, when I read I don't have that exact thing in front of me, but I thought, from what I remembered, I thought it was that it was like so cold that it burned, but I could be wrong.
Oh, really?
That's of it, at least. So I found the excerpt here saying, his skin was as icy as ever, but the trail his fingers left on my skin was alarmingly warm, like I'd been burned, but didn't feel the pain of it yet. So I do think there's some significance to that, but it is still cold. But
yeah.
Different kind of sensation of cold. But I did have a note from Midnight Sun that I thought was interesting, was talking about how Edward thought that Emmett was possibly the only one who might prefer being a vampire, which I just thought was something interesting that was pointed out. And I don't know if you're ready to jump into, but they kind of, at the end of this chapter is when Edward goes home, right? I'm just making sure that I'm right. Yeah. Actually, they go back to Bella's.
Yeah.
And then Charlie's coming, and then Jacob and Billy are also coming over. So that happens. And we hear some of the first thoughts of Jacob about Edward's car.
Yes. Yeah. We also see Billy freaking out. I mean, in a casual way, but he is like clearly he's pretty upset to see Edward with Bella, and he's acting weird, but he doesn't say anything to Charlie, which is interesting. Which again, we find out he doesn't say anything in the next section, but and okay, in this section also, that Edward is like, it's too bad that he's into Bella, basically because he's like, oh, I know, like, it's too bad he's into Bella and he's part of this tribe because we'll never be friends, but he seems like an actually like such a good person, you know, which is really, really sweet. And I think it's interesting that that Edward notes it as another complication. Like, he's like, of course, you know, like that's the vibe I get, is that he's like, of course you also would be friends and have connections to these people. Like, of course they're coming over. Of course, because it's Bella.
Yeah. I was surprised during this how like freaked out Billy was, and like, they've been there for like over a year. Why are you shocked? And I guess it's because he's going over to his friend's house, and it's actually at his friend's house. But
I mean, you kind of get the idea that Billy doesn't really leave maybe the reservation very often because, you know, he's saying like he has to get around somehow. That's why Jacob's driving. even though Jacob's like too young to drive. So, and the Cullens are not allowed there. So he probably actually doesn't see them very often, even though they've been back for 2 years.
Yeah, that's probably true. But I also, when we hear what Edward's thoughts are on Jacob, I was pleasantly surprised by them, because I was a little worried when we finally heard them that it'd be like a Mike Newton situation and that I would end up not liking Jacob. But he talks about how he that there's something very engaging about Jacob's mind and that it's pure and open. But then it also talks about that he suddenly had a feeling that Jacob was like his born enemy, which I thought was interesting, because I'm wondering at this point if Edward has any idea, spoilers, that Jacob might be a werewolf.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I had questions about something later on in the chapter when Edward goes back to the Cullens' house and is talking to Carlisle about it. And Carlisle says, I have to find the exact quote because, Carlisle frowns and says, he says, they've lost their protectors. They are in no danger from us. And I'm like, what does he mean they lost their protectors? Are there currently no werewolves? Like,
that's how I interpreted it. Is that the Cullens think there are no werewolves right now, and that the tribe, like, it is this legend, like that the tribe doesn't currently believe that, which, okay, here's my hypothesis, which I want to talk to you about, is my hypothesis is that there are no werewolves in the tribe currently.
When you were saying that the Cullens were thinking that, I'm like, oh, so do you think the Cullens just think that, but there are werewolves? Which I was surprised by, but I also have the same thought as you.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I think there are currently no werewolves, which is different than maybe even the other episode that we talked about. But I think there are currently no werewolves, and that something about like Billy feeling more threatened that Edward is at like Charlie's house, I think that's going to prompt then something to happen that then creates the werewolves, because all of a sudden they feel more threatened, where so far they haven't interacted since the Cullens last lived there, I guess, and interacted, so that the werewolves, because there wasn't a need, their enemy wasn't there, no one became werewolves, and now this has triggered it. That's my hypothesis.
I think that's a really interesting theory and definitely possible. And I kind of always had questions about, because we hear about Jacob's great-grandfather who was a werewolf, and then Jacob's a werewolf, but I'm like, but Billy, to our knowledge, was never and doesn't seem like this. And I always thought that was interesting. So maybe it's something about them feeling threatened somehow. But I like that. I wonder if we probably won't get more insight because we don't have New Moon from Edward's perspective. But
yeah. Okay, I have always said that, I mean, I'm excited we're going to read, the novella. Midnight Sun has been great, but I've always said what I wish that Stephanie Myers would write is not another Twilight POV or like not another vampire POV, but that she would do more about the werewolf community. Because I feel like from what I'm remembering, we don't get a ton of info, even in New Moon, where it's like a big part of the plot. Like, I just feel like we don't have that much backstory. And I would love a whole book, maybe not like a Jacob POV, but like just like a whole one about the tribe.
Yeah, to hear more about the tribe and like the history and how it all works. Yeah, maybe that's one of the 2 books that she's still writing, hopefully.
Yeah. Okay, what if it was an Ephraim one, like Jacob's great-grandfather, and then he's interacting, it'd have all the Cullens still. Yeah. Well, not all of them, it'd have 5 of them.
Yeah, wouldn't have but...
Yeah, but everybody else, which would be really so cool.
Well, I'm going to be disappointed if that's not what the book is.
Right? Stephanie, if you're listening, suggestion.
It seems like a significant thing to say, and I don't know, that's something that I want to pay attention to as we read on, if there's any indication of that or not. Because if there's not, I feel like that's potentially like something she put in there to like...
for future books.
For people to consider for her next books, because this wasn't published till 2020, so... Interesting.
Yeah. And, because specifically, Edward is talking, like he makes a comment basically like, well, if they have a problem, there's nothing they can really do about it if we're being honest. You know, like he says that to Carlisle, right? Like implying that they're super powerful. So like what are they going to do? They don't have any werewolves to come after them. And Carlisle makes a comment basically like being like, don't write anything off or don't like talk like that, you know, which almost makes me think again, that was part of me thinking, oh, they can maybe trigger something, or I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I found this whole section interesting when we got like introduced to the more like vampire werewolf what is the word I'm looking for? Anyway, but and then I also was, I don't know, I was a little surprised that Edward already told them about how Jacob unintentionally broke the treaty. I mean, not unintentionally. He knew he was breaking the treaty, but he thought it wasn't a big deal. Um and I was also made a note that I was surprised that Alice didn't have any vision of this, but also it kind of makes sense since she wasn't there the first time, you know, since her and they weren't there, that it probably wasn't something she gave a lot of thought necessarily to. So I guess that kind of makes sense. But I also thought that this section kind of confirmed for me that Jacob isn't aware there's werewolves. How do you feel about that whole situation, since you were thinking that he was aware of them earlier?
Yeah, I am more like I tend to agree with you. I think like hearing him, like he definitely, we're led to believe, thinks this is all a myth. And like he's kind of like laughing at his dad having too big of a reaction that the Cullens are there, and like almost like teasing him to Bella in the same way that he's like teasing his dad that they're going to Charlie's because their TV broke and he wants to watch the game, you know? Like it's on that same level of like frivolousness is how he's presenting it. So, and I just, from what I'm gathering, I'm like, I don't know that Jacob is a good enough actor to deceive us. Like he seems kind of too earnest to be like playing it, you know?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's correct.
Yeah.
And especially now that we have the insight about them losing their protectors, as Carlisle says, I think it's very possible that he isn't aware or hasn't been alive or around when there has been werewolves on the reservation. So that makes more sense, because I was kind of questioning when we talked about this before how it would be possible that he wouldn't be aware of them. But if they don't have them, there's that answer. So
yeah, interesting. And it is, I think, notable. I was not surprised that Edward immediately leaves Bella's house and goes to the hospital to tell Carlisle. Like he is like, he does not want to wait or hesitate at all. He wants Carlisle to know immediately. But I actually think that like checks, because the whole book, like the book opens with kind of Edward being the most responsible of all the kids, has the most control, is maybe the most conscious of the rules. He's kind of like a little more baffled that his siblings like can't keep up, or that they would like flex for the person they love. And then we see him totally flip, right? And then he's the one that's most off the rails, and they're all kind of like, Edward's losing it. And so this was kind of like a callback to that like original character, and kind of reaffirming that relationship is still more the same with Carlisle.
Yeah, so I don't like, for some reason I was surprised that he talked about Jacob breaking the treaty, but I do think it makes sense. I think I was just surprised because I feel like there would be more consequences from that immediately, and there aren't really. So
yeah.
Why? And then oh, sorry. Go ahead if you have.
Oh, yeah. No, that's good.
Okay. I was just going to say, we're kind of also leading into the next chapter, because we got more insight from Edward in that chapter about the conversations that Jacob and that they have while they're there. But then we see that from Bella's perspective in the next chapter. And I just had a note of when she was talking to Jacob and talking about, the whole Cullens being vampires thing, and Jacob's kind of like, oh, superstitious old man or whatever. And Bella's like, he wouldn't say anything to Charlie, right? And I'm like, Bella, you need to chill out. You're making
I
it
know.
obvious.
Yes. Every time she has a big, like, in the fight with Mike, when then he's like, it looks like he wants to, like, eat you. Like, I'm like, she is not playing it cool. She's not at all, which I kind of, like, again, I think that's a little bit her character, but also it just, like, annoys me. Like, I'm like, ugh. Don't make Rosalie justified. Like, that's the worst thing you could do for me.
That's really true. Yeah, but I found it interesting that in this instance where she's like asking Jacob about that, it says that Jacob stared at her for a moment and she couldn't read the expression in his dark eyes. I'm like, oh, what's that about? I want to know. But we didn't really get anything from Edward's perspective in that moment, so it must not be that significant unless Edward missed it, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, pivoting a little bit back into Midnight Sun, where Carlisle kind of ends his conversation with Edward by saying, like, are you going to go see your mom? And, like, are you going home? Like, Esme misses you. And I guess I didn't realize he's, like, not been home at all. Like, yeah, I did not make that connection. He, like, has not been there at all. Like, where she hasn't seen him in days. Yeah, I thought that was interesting. And to me, I mean, they just found out, like, the timeline would have been that, like, all of them found out that he told just at lunch that same day, but it does kind of seem like he's avoiding them, maybe because of the criticism that he's, like, changing a lot, or they think he's paranoid, maybe because he does feel guilty that he told Bella in some ways. So yeah.
I was confused about what chapter on, because the chapter Complications is from Bella's perspective, and then there's Complications from Edward's perspective, but then there's another complication, and that all captures the thing. So we kind of jumped ahead a couple chapters in here, so I'm just looking back at my notes, because I think we didn't talk yet about, I think it was already skipped over by this point, about the bet that was made between the Cullens. Did that already happen, or is that yet to happen?
I thought that was
maybe it's
later. Yeah.
Like, after we read A Midnight Sun. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is. It is.
Yeah. I think it's, because it's not, he goes home and Esme has sent everyone else out of the house, and then they kind of have a moment to reconnect. And then he's back at school the next day and finds out about the bet. And then he, like, has the confrontation with his family finally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know if you had any more thoughts or anything about Esme, but and, like, their conversation. But again, like, she's just so sweet. Like, she just truly, like, wants what's best for him. And, like, it's just, she's just so sweet. Her and Carlisle are the best. Again, I thought it was just so sweet. They're playing piano together. She's actually being, like, a genuine, like, mom to him.
Yeah.
I
think I'm just always surprised when they have, like, when Carlisle and Esme are, like, genuine parents, just because it's such a weird situation, and especially after realizing that Edward, like, joined the family previous to Esme. I think it's really, really sweet that they have a regular, like, mother-son relationship. It's nice.
Yeah. And particularly, I mean, a little sad, but also that he doesn't really remember like, his human mom and what that was like anymore. Like, he talks about not remembering his childhood, which also is really interesting. Like, he's not holding on to his human memories, even though he clearly does not really want to be a vampire, which Esme kind of talks about in this section, actually, where she's like, do you resent Carlisle for turning you? Like, because he is like, he's talking about longing. Like, he's so melancholy because he's like sad that he won't have like a normal relationship with Bella. And and then she asks if he resents it, and he does say no, he doesn't, even though he clearly also does not want to be a vampire. So like very like actually like nuanced emotions happening there. Yeah. Oh, anything else you want to add in that section, or should we just
which section? I'm just like trying to get through my notes because I'm so confused because of how the chapters are at. So we're at the end of what chapter right now?
Well, that would have
with Esme, because I felt like I had more notes, but I can't. What chapter was that?
Yeah. I think, okay, so Complications 1 is where we get all the info with Angela Weber and all of that. Past that, I think we're on 13. Oh, no.
This is making me realize next week I'm going to organize my notes better because they're a freaking mess right now. Because, okay, one thing that I do want to talk about is at the end of chapter 12, when they're back at the Cullens and are talking about, Jasper had a strong reaction to, was it to Jacob breaking the treaty?
He's like concerned.
And he's concerned and is like thinking that him and Alice should flee. And then Carlisle like talks to him and calms him down. And I feel like that's just also demonstrating how much Carlisle is respected by everybody in the family. And I like that we just don't get insight to exactly what is said, but that it says like the conflict was over before it started because Jasper admired Carlisle as much as anyone else. So
Right.
But I did feel like I had more notes about Esme, if I can figure out where the heck that is. I want to say that's in chapter 13, but...
Oh, yeah. No, I think we did talk about this out of order.
Yeah, we got a little jumbled up there with the order. We were jumping around.
Yeah, I think... Okay, I think he goes home. I think he goes home and...
After the hospital. I found it, but I did not have that many notes. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I think he goes home before then.
He does. That's where he was talking about Jasper's reaction. And then...
Yeah, because that's where they confront him. So he has all the confrontation with the siblings first.
Yeah.
And then it's the next day that then there's Billy.
Yeah, so he goes home and he talks about Jacob breaking the treaty, and they have a discussion then, and that happens. And then the next day is when we see him run into Jacob and Billy, and then he goes to the hospital and talks to Carlisle, and then he goes home and talks to Esme. And I don't know if I had much significance, but I did find that it was interesting that he didn't blame Carlisle for his transition, which I was kind of surprised by. I feel like Edward can be a bit cynical in the fact that he didn't have resentment towards him. I was a little surprised.
Okay, yeah, so I think, I don't know if I messed us up or what happened there, but so we kind of skipped over then because I was thinking the conversation with his siblings happens after his conversation with Esme, and it happens before. So I don't know if you had any notes or thoughts on that whole section, but that's obviously pretty significant. That's going to be towards the end of 12. where his conversation with Esme is in 13.
Yeah, that I don't know if I had a ton of notes. That is also where I had the note of just talking about Jasper.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
oh, talking about how Rosalie is jealous, and at first I was like, why could she not get over this? But then it was talking about how she's jealous of Bella being a human and having choices and that sort of thing. And I'm like, that makes sense. That makes me understand Rosalie a bit. I still think she should go about it in a different way, but
For
it does
sure.
make sense her like motivation behind things. And yeah. And at this point, Emmett says something about I think, oh, maybe I'm the wrong thing. Asking if Edward's gonna tell like the full story of what happened, and he's like still saying no about that, which I thought was interesting that Edward's still protecting Rosalie somewhat. So
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah. In the conflict, obviously, it's mostly between like Rosalie because Alice and Jasper are like in another room and Carlisle then has to go like talk to Jasper, right? But I thought it was really interesting, specifically the conversation around Rosalie wanting to trash Edward's car, and that one, she only wants to do it if it'll really make Edward mad. But I think the thing, which I'm like, yeah, siblings, I don't know. Okay, but the thing that I think is interesting here is that, like, Edward genuinely is like, whatever, it's just a toy. If you'll feel better and we can, like, move on because you torch my car, great, you should do it. And it's genuine. And that then Rosalie is kind of like caught by that because Edward is the only one of the family who cares about cars as much as her. And like, so it's kind of the first glimpse that we get that Rosalie gets there's a change in Edward beyond that he's just like something annoying or crazy. Like, this is kind of the first moment where she like is seeing that he's like changing for the better in some ways, not just being like a paranoid stalker. Yeah, which I don't know. I just thought that that's kind of interesting.
yeah, I agree. And like Edward, I think because she straight up says something about how he's different, and he's like, "Yeah, I am," and agrees with her, which I thought was interesting. I also thought it was interesting in this section about like Rosalie is like, oh, why did you tell her? Why would you tell her that? And Emmett says something about how he's surprised that he actually could because he doesn't like to say the word. And I'm like, have we ever heard Edward say directly he's a vampire? Have we heard him say the word vampire? Like, he's had it in
I
his
don't think so.
but I don't think we've ever seen him say it out loud, which that was interesting.
Yeah, and that again, that was a connection point between Edward and Rosalie, right? That Rosalie also will not talk about being a vampire and won't say it. Yeah, very interesting.
Okay, I think we kind of covered things now after jumping around and getting a bit lost there. I'll just look
at my gosh, what a
chapter
freaking jumble. Sorry, everyone.
So we covered Twilight 11 and then Midnight Sun 12 complications. Also covered that. That ends with the sibling disagreement at the Cullens. And then Midnight Sun chapter 13, another complication, is still the Edward's perspective of Twilight chapter 11. It just got split up into two chapters, and that ends with running into Billy and Jacob and going to see Carlisle at the hospital and going home and talking to Esme.
Yes. So we flipped 12 and 13 in our conversations.
Yeah. So now we're going to Twilight chapter 12, which we already talked a little bit about because it starts with when Jacob and Billy are at Charlie and Bella's house.
Yes. Yep.
Flip back to Twilight. Don't know how much notes I have, but yeah. So this chapter, they're over at their house, and then the next day they go to school, and Edward ditches class in the afternoon to go hunting with Alice. And then
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the chapter, Bella and Edward, it's the next day, Bella and Edward head to the meadow. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what happens here.
Yes.
Do you
Um,
have any notes?
I mean, nothing like super huge in the plot. Again, this is another one. He's asking her a lot of questions about herself when they're together. Um, they're chatting. He leaves. Bella's really upset. Like she's bummed. She's disappointed. Um, and but he decides to bring her truck. They drop off her truck at school when him and Alice are going to leave. And there's a couple things that are interesting in this. One, Bella asks specifically, why are you going to hunt with Alice? And he said Alice is the most supportive, being like that Alice is like there and trying to do what she can to help this relationship more than anyone else. So I think that is interesting. And then like we also get a lot of comments about like then when Bella's home being like nothing's altered. Like it's kind of the first time where she's like, how did he get in to the house? You know, like it's her first kind of like clue into that, which she doesn't necessarily pick up on, but is yeah, we as the reader reading both know that he's been coming in every night, so he obviously knows how to get in without altering any of the locks or anything. I also would just my other note is like she's so chill that he's gonna try to find the keys in her jean pockets on her floor. Like I'm like I would be mortified.
Absolutely, same.
Like
she talks about like what her when in the Midnight Sun perspective, she talks about what her house looked like back in Phoenix, and is talking about how messy it is, and you kind of get the vibe that she's embarrassed. I'm like, but wouldn't it be more embarrassing him like searching through your currently messy bedroom and going through your pockets and whatnot? But she seems pretty chill about the whole thing.
She seems fine.
Have a question for you. It's when this is all happening, and they bring the truck back and leave the keys in the ignition, and then a little note that says be safe. And I'm like, I wonder if Callie is worried about what's going to happen now, because you were worried last week when she like went off on her own. Like, were you having any thoughts that something might happen while they're like split up or anything, or not so much?
I didn't, because I didn't think, like, I think what it's building towards is their interaction, like Edward and Bella's interaction in the meadow is kind of what they're building towards right now. And I didn't think something happened before that. Like, I think kind of the tension that they're building is like, is Edward gonna kill her tomorrow? Not like, although it would actually be a very good time for then something else to happen in there, would like kind of throw you. But no, I wasn't thinking about that at all.
Okay. I was just curious.
But now I am. No. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think I have really any other notes for Twilight.
Yeah, so now we go to Midnight Sun.
Chapter 14.
14. Yes. And they are off. They are off.
I also just had a note at my first note in the beginning of this chapter was Edward's talking about it being a peaceful night in Bella's room that night, and that she like even the rain didn't disturb her, which it normally does. And we didn't talk about that in the previous chapter. Bella decides to take some cold medicine to fall asleep. And I was kind of shocked that Edward didn't somehow pick up on that. And I also if there's anything about that is gonna like come back up later, like if she takes it. I don't know. I feel like when I read that detail, I'm like, oh, I kind of remember this. And I'm like, why would I remember this if it wasn't significant? But I don't know if it actually is significant, but
maybe it's just so relatable. Like, you can't sleep, so you gotta, I don't know,
yeah, I don't
take
know.
some NyQuil. Yeah, I do think we didn't note that then our Twilight section ends. They're on the hike. They get to the meadow, and she is about to see him in the sun for the first time. That's where we're ending the Twilight section.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Also of note, kind of related to that, this week's section of the movie doesn't really go along with what was happening. Like, we could have not watched anything this week and watched what we watched this week last week, really, but because we learned that the reveal of Edward being a vampire is a bit different in the movie than the book. They're not on a
Yep.
drive, where they're off in the woods instead. And then it ends just before he is gonna do whatever he's gonna do in the meadow.
Yeah. I'm doing some sparkly gestures, everyone who's listening on a podcast. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, then 14. Tell me some of your thoughts. We get Edward's perspective of the same thing, heading out to the woods and in the woods.
Yeah. Is that all, or do we or just oh yeah. Um and also them going to school and what
Yeah.
he so um he does talk about early on in this chapter, as he's getting to know her and like what she wants to do in life, and that um she kind of thinks that she wants to do something with English. She's always been interested in English, and that she maybe
Mm-hmm.
want to be a teacher, probably a community college, but she would want to be teaching elective classes so that anyone who would want to be there, um, anyone who was in the class wanted to be there. And she also did research about being like a publisher, but it's a lot easier to get a job as a teacher and much more practical. And he makes a note saying that all of her dreams had clipped wings and was not that amenable to.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I feel like that's a really significant thing. And talks about her fate, that it's probably a product of facing realities long before she should have to. Um, and he also talks about at some point about, I think this was in an earlier chapter and we skipped over it because it was just, them getting to know her kind of thing, but about how he is potentially her first love. He doesn't know for sure if she loves him or whatnot, but
Yeah.
kind of acknowledges that, like, that's kind of like a problem for her whole world to end like here, like, kind of thing. And I just think it's interesting that he has this perspective of her dreams having clipped wings and like what her future is going to look like. And I don't know, it's just something of note. But
Yeah, and also because like I wonder if he has more empathy because that's kind of like his story, right? Like this is his first love also, and he was 17 when he was changed. And so like I'm curious, do you think that's more about like his empathy and like that he's not admitting that he feels that way about himself directly, because he's saying he doesn't resent Carlisle, but then he has all these concerns about how much this will limit Bella, which we're not even directly getting that. Like, I feel like he hasn't accepted yet she's gonna become a vampire. But yeah, I'm curious what you think.
yeah, I think he definitely is responding with empathy, since he was turned at 17, like you said, and he obviously would choose not to be a vampire if he had the choice. So, in Bella's current situation, like, if it was to be considered about turning her into a vampire, obviously it is a choice, versus Edward's situation, it was like, you're gonna be a vampire or you're gonna die. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he definitely does have empathy in this situation, and sees that she hasn't like lived a lot of life, and seen a lot of things or done a lot of things, and like he knows that he would want to experience those things if he were human. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think that's some of the conflict, and we're like seeing that more.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. Another very big thing happens at lunch. The moment we've all been waiting for. Me, I personally have been waiting for, aka Alice.
Yes,
Alice gets
that's what
to
I thought you were
meet
going to say.
Bella finally.
Yeah, I found it funny that she had a vision about it earlier. I was like, oh, it's going to happen soon. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I love that. I didn't comment on it in the Twilight chapter because I was just like, I just want to read Midnight Sun to see what Alice thinks. But so, yeah, so sweet. I love that Alice is so psyched to meet Bella. I mean, we've been seeing it for chapters and chapters and chapters. She's asking to like, please, is it time yet? Please, she's like, Bella's gonna be my best friend, and I'm like ready to get this going. So finally, they meet in the tiniest interaction, basically because Edward is like, whatever, I guess, like, it's fine. And Alice is like, yeah, I can already see you're not going to stop me, so I'm doing it. Like,
yeah,
so good.
it was pretty good. I
Mm-hmm.
did have to like go back and reread around this time in the book to totally understand. It was talking about some vision that Alice had shortly before she walked up to them. I think I'm getting this timing right. And it's talking about some vision she had of like, I want to say it's of the meadow, because Edward's talking about that he would talk or sacrifice his time with Bella for the afternoon to show Alice how wrong she was about this vision, and we don't see exactly what the vision is. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, what is the vision like? What is it? Is it that Bella like isn't shocked by like his appearance, or is it some vision where he like hurts her? Or I like when
Right.
I read, because I'm like, I don't know quite what's happening, and I don't think we're supposed to, and I'm curious if we learn exactly what that vision was as we read on or not.
Yeah. I don't think, though, that like it would make the most sense that it's like he's trying to prove Alice wrong, that like he's not going to hurt her. But also, I think if he really thought that Alice had a vision that he was going to hurt her, I don't think he'd go. You know, like he's been so hyper protective of her. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious also.
But he also does, I mean, and this could be not related to the vision because he keeps talking about like that he should be or she should be nervous to be like around him by herself and that kind of thing. But that is
Right.
probably just him being protective or whatnot. But did you have any insight to what you thought the vision might be? Or
Um, I don't know. I think I had like kind of similar thoughts to you. I'm trying to see if I have anything highlighted around that section. Um, in my Kindle specifically, but yeah,
yeah,
I think it was.
also wondering if it had something to do with eventually her turning or not. Yeah, I'm curious
Right.
what the vision was.
Yeah, I thought, I was not led to believe it was like she was in imminent danger in the meadow that day, and thought maybe it was about something more long term
Okay.
that he was like concerned about, was more my thought.
Okay.
But
Okay.
again, I think that in part because I really think everything we've seen, he's so paranoid about her getting hurt.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, so I don't know. But I will say it would, I mean, I think he's justified in being mad because the other thing that's big before they go into the forest, that again, we didn't talk about in the Twilight section as much, but that Bella basically calls all these people to say she's not hanging out with Edward. Like she wants to make it really clear she's not with him. And she does this thinking she's keeping Edward safe.
Yeah.
And Edward's really actually mad about this because he's like, you are like doing all these things to like assuage any guilt off of me if I murder you.
Yeah.
Which is like a psycho thing of her to do, but also like, again, clearly the red flags in this book are not red flags to me. I don't know. Um, but yeah, and so I do think maybe like him being mad also could be about that maybe the vision was something like dangerous or bad happens then. And so then he's like extra mad at her. But I think he would be mad like regardless. I just thought about that as we were talking, that maybe that could have been part of the rationale, but I did in the moment think it was more something long term.
Yeah, and when you said that, it also, like, I was thinking, and it would make sense if it was like a similar vision to what he saw before of Alice's visions, where it was her being turned. Because I think when I read this, I assumed that it was something about the meadow, but looking at what the book says, it's just he's talking to Bella about the next day when they go to the meadow, and he says something about Alice's visions was overpowering his composure. And I think for some reason I just automatically assumed that it was about that same situation, but it could easily be just her having another vision of her being turned, and Edward thought at that point that like maybe that wasn't in the future anymore because he had changed things somehow. So it could still
Yeah.
possibly be that same thing. So
Yeah, yeah. I think he's just so in denial that she's going to become a vampire. Like, he really still is not accepting that.
yeah.
And I kind of feel like Alice is more like, okay, you're hanging out with her one on one now. You're being seen in public. And, you know, now is the first time that Alice gets to meet her. So Alice is kind of like, yeah, she's going to be my sister and be part of this family. And Edward, like, can't really deal with that yet. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I also had a note here about from Edward's perspective. We already talked about it a little bit from Bella's perspective about how Alice is the most supportive, and Bella's wondering what the others think, and she says it in like a
Mm,
hushed voice, and he response, but he says something about, he doesn't say to Bella, but in the chapter he says something about that Bella would be horrified if she knew how easily they could all hear her whisper. And I'm like, can you imagine that? It just like totally broke the context for me. I'm like, that means all the conversations they've had at lunch, all of the Cullens have been able to hear everything. Like,
yes.
it's a little crazy to think about. Like,
Yeah, I thought about that when I know we said we're gonna come back to it, and we're finally here. When Rosalie is like staring her down, you know, and like so pissed, and they like make eye contact. So that was another moment that I thought then, like, that seems almost like a magical power, like that Rosalie has her in like almost a trance as she's like staring at her. Again, it's an emotionally intense scene. It's not about anything mythical or magical happening. But that then like Edward like hisses at her basically, but
yeah,
he does it like, they say he does it like under his breath, and then Rosalie like gets the hint and is like, all right, whatever, you know, but like,
yeah.
yeah, I don't know.
Or
Just so
then there's
funny.
also like a note about where Alice warns them that Bella's about to look, so she tells all of them to look at
Yeah.
something. When Bella looks over, she doesn't think anything of it because they're not looking at her at all, even though they had all just been staring, and Alice is like,
Yeah.
look away.
Yeah. So funny. So funny.
So
Also,
I
like
really like having
that.
Edward's perspective for that kind of thing, because when you read Bella's
Yeah.
perspective, you're like, oh, it's plausible that they weren't staring, but it's like, nope, they were. They just looked away. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah. They're all like so interested and invested, which is like obviously that's how you would feel, you know, but it's yeah, it's just funny because you miss all of that in Twilight.
mhm.
Um yeah, yeah, I don't know. And because, right, like in Twilight, she even says, like, oh, it's just like the first time I looked at them, which again is when Alice was like, everyone look normal. Like the same thing happened. So it really was just like when she first saw them.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, because both times Alice was like, this girl's gonna go stare at us, everyone look, whatever. Yeah, so
So
funny.
funny.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Oh,
you have any other notes? I don't think I have anything else really.
oh no. Um, yeah, I feel like this episode was a little chaotic because we both got lost and a little
Yeah.
jumbled up with our chapter orders there. So apologies to everyone. But yeah, no, almost all my thoughts in this whole section were just around his interactions with his siblings were like most of my thoughts. Um, which again, those are the parts I've been enjoying the most. And I think because these last few chapters have been pretty repetitive of like the exact same situation, just in the two POV, which is not really my thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. So, but I'm excited for next week. It's going to be interesting. It's the dream, Stephanie's dream.
Yeah, I know. I don't
Oh,
actually remember that much about the Meadow scene other than like her seeing him in the sun. So I am curious to see what happens. So
yeah, I can't remember if this is the skin of a killer Bella is just a movie thing or if it's a book thing also.
yeah,
So,
I also don't remember if that was the book or not.
yeah,
Definitely, we're going to see that in the movie next week. But
yeah,
yeah,
mm-hmm,
I don't remember if that was in the book.
yeah.
But
Well, before we wrap up today's episode, we have a couple announcements. One is we got our first listener email, so we can chat a little bit about that. The other big announcement we want to do is that we starting for the next episode, next Twilight Tuesday for week 5, we are launching a merch line. So we'll have some Glittery Musings merch. We've got a couple things in the works. Those links will be in our bio for Instagram and all our social media platforms. So you can find it best that way. Is going to be the most convenient spot if you are interested in checking out some of our Twilight and Glittery Musings merch. Yeah. But and again, that's Glittery Musings is our handle on basically every platform. If you want to email us, it's glitterymusingspod at Gmail.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm very excited for the merch also, and excited for
Yes.
our first email.
Uh-huh. Yes. So let's talk about it. Email our first email from Dear Dallas.
Yes, I love that it goes into as much detail as it does, and I did get to the end because it does say at the end, if you got this far, thanks for reading. I did read the full thing. So it talks about our from last week, what we talked about last week, and talks a bit about Bella's internet research about the different types of vampires. And something of note that we did not talk about is that Bella's talking about the one good vampires that she finds is
Mm-hmm.
actually talking about the Volturi, which we didn't really make that connection or talk about that.
What?
Yeah,
She is?
yeah, because it's that they're like keeping law, like so that they it says here, wait. Yeah, so they're not good, but they're sort of enemies of all vampires because they keep this law for their own benefit.
Oh.
I don't have in front of me what exactly it said out of there, but I don't think I
Yeah.
made that was a Volturi, and obviously you did not either. So
No.
um,
Literally didn't.
that was something of note. There was also something that I just wanted to clarify because it was talking about when um, Bella and Edward are in the car together after it's confirmed that he is a vampire. And I think it was me who said, I don't know if you said it, but also or agreed with it, but that Edward was being patronizing about Bella's flirting with Jacob. And I wanted to clarify that I meant patronizing towards Jacob and not towards Bella, because that
Mm.
apparently did not come across. I didn't think he was
Mm.
being patronizing towards Bella, but was towards Jacob, which is to be expected. So
yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. I like obviously that Dallas is on the same page with me, that their interactions is phenomenal. And I just think it's hilarious that she's like, I loved the dinner scene. Don't think it. She said, call me a creep slash a romantic in the email because she loves the dinner scene so much. And then she says, sorry, Amy. Very cute. Very cute. Anyways.
I also think I totally missed one of these details that was talked about in this email about Edward accidentally uprooting a tree when
Yes.
Mike touches Bella's hair. I don't know if I missed that or if I just don't remember specifically, but
no, same. I also
noticed that when I read it actually, but
yeah, I clearly missed it. I do think that's hilarious. Yeah. Essentially, if it's not clear, Dallas sent us an email with all her thoughts from the last episode, which is phenomenal. And so that's us, we're responding a little bit to some of her comments. And yeah, hopefully that is clear. Maybe editing Amy if that we can figure out what that
there's
what
gonna
that
be more editing
feels
in
like.
This episode than any other episode.
Oh my gosh.
It's because we both didn't take great notes this week. Normally, if one of us doesn't, the other one has some, but
I know
both of us were kind of
all over.
Also, loved hearing the thoughts and would love to continue hearing thoughts from anybody about what we are talking about on the podcast or reading.
Yeah, we so appreciate it. It's fun to hear other people's perspectives. It's also fun because, I know this specific Dallas is a friend of mine in real life and is a huge fan, has read the books a lot. So it's fun, like hearing about the things that she picks up on that we're missing as people who are just essentially reading it for the first time. I mean, I feel like I'm really reading it for the first time. And we both are for the first time as adults. So super fun. Please keep sending us your thoughts, Dallas. Please send us your thoughts, everyone else. It's really, just interesting to hear what we're missing and things like that. Thank you guys so much. This was a little bit of a chaotic episode as we both mixed up our chapter orders and got a little scrambled, but we are so thankful for tuning in. Next week, what are we reading? What are we reading for this next week, for week 5?
We are reading Midnight Sun chapters 15 through 18. And Twilight, only chapters 13 and 14. So apparently a little longer chapters. And the movie, it's a whole 12 minutes, which is quite the increase from this week. So, and details about the reading order and the exact timing of the movie is on our Instagram, Glittery Musings.
Yes. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.
Woo-hoo, bye.